I warned them. I sent emails. I showed them weather alerts. I even gave them the exact hour the mountain pass would disappear under a whiteout. The HOA ignored me. They kept the road open anyway, because closing it would look bad to tourists. 6 hours later, cars were buried. Drivers were trapped. And rescue teams were digging people out of walls of snow where the HOA said it was safe to drive. Now the HOA is trying to blame the storm. But the truth is, they were warned. The first alert came through while I was still drinking my morning coffee. I live near Whiteout Pass, a narrow mountain stretch that snakes through the ridgeline above our HOA resort community. Tourists love it because it offers postcard views. Locals fear it because when weather turns, it turns fast. There's no shoulder, no cell signal, and no place to pull off once the snow starts closing in. That morning, my weather radio crackled with a warning I hadn't heard in years. Rapid whiteout conditions expected. Zero visibility. Road closures recommended within 6 hours. I didn't hesitate. I forwarded the alert to the HOA board's emergency email list. Then I pulled satellite forecasts, wind models, and state highway advisories and sent those too. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. HOA President. Thanks, we're monitoring it. Monitoring it. That's what they always said when something inconvenient was about to happen. I knew better. The HOA ran the only access road into our resort area. It was private property, so county snowplows wouldn't touch it unless the board formally closed it. And closing it meant canceling tourist bookings, restaurant reservations, and weekend rentals. Money always came first. By noon, the clouds were already dropping low over the peak. The wind had started to howl in gusts that rattled the trees. Snow flurries whipped sideways across the pass. I sent another email. Visibility is dropping. This pass needs to be closed now. No reply. At 1 p.m., the state issued an official travel advisory. Non-essential travel discouraged. Whiteout conditions imminent. I forwarded that too. Still nothing. So I drove to the HOA office. The parking lot was half full of rental SUVs. Families were checking in, dragging suitcases, kids running around excited for a snow weekend. Inside, the front desk clerk smiled. Can I help you? I need to speak to the board, I said. About the pass. She hesitated. They're in a meeting. Then tell them people are about to die if they don't close the road. That got her moving. A minute later, the HOA vice president, Karen, because of course her name was Karen, stepped out. We appreciate your concern, she said in a clipped tone. But we've decided to keep the pass open. The forecast isn't certain. It's absolutely certain, I snapped. This is a textbook whiteout system. When it hits, nobody will see 10 feet in front of them. Karen crossed her arms. Closing the road would cause panic and financial loss. So will pulling bodies out of snowdrifts. She frowned. You're being dramatic. I pulled out my phone and showed her the live highway cam. Snow was already building on the guardrails. Wind was blowing it across the pavement in blinding sheet. This is 30 minutes away from total blackout, I said. If anyone gets stuck up there, they won't be able to turn around. She glanced at it briefly and handed my phone back. We have a responsibility to our guests. No, I said quietly. You have a responsibility to their safety. Karen turned away. We'll reassess later. I walked out shaking with anger. At 2:17 p.m., the snow hit. Not gently. Not gradually. It slammed into the mountains like a wall. From my window, I watched the sky disappear as if someone had pulled a white curtain over the world. Wind howled through the trees. Snow blasted sideways so hard it stung against the glass. My phone started lighting up. I can't see the road. We're stuck near mile marker 12. Is the pass still open? We're sliding. I tried calling the HOA. No answer. By 3 p.m., the first emergency call went out to the county. By 3:30, rescue trucks were fighting their way up the mountain, their lights barely visible through the swirling white. And still, the HOA didn't close the road. They didn't want the liability. They didn't want the refunds. So instead, they let car after car drive straight into a blizzard trap. By the time they finally locked the gate, there were already dozens of vehicles buried up there. Families, tourists, delivery drivers, all trapped in a pass they had been warned about. And now? Rescue teams were pulling cars from the snow. Because the HOA had chosen money over lives. By the time the county finally forced the gate shut, it was already too late. The storm had swallowed Whiteout Pass whole. From my living room window, all I could see was a wall of spinning snow where the mountain used to be. Wind screamed so loudly it sounded like a jet engine tearing through the sky. Trees bent under the weight of ice. Power lines swayed. And somewhere up there, dozens of cars were stuck. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. We slid into a snowbank. There's a family next to us with a baby. We can't see anything. Are we going to die? I tried to stay calm as I replied. Stay in your vehicles. Run engines for heat in short bursts. Crack a window. Help is coming. But inside, my stomach was twisting into knots. I knew that pass. Once visibility dropped, even experienced drivers could end up sideways on the road. And if you went off the edge, there was nothing but a sheer drop into forested ravine. At 3:48 p.m., the first rescue convoy called in. We have at least 20 vehicles buried from mile 8 to mile 14. 20. That was just the first sweep. The county sheriff called the HOA emergency line, the one I had been emailing all day. No one answered. By the time Karen finally picked up, she was already in panic mode. We're getting emergency calls, she said. What's happening? What's happening is exactly what I warned you about, I snapped. You left that road open. But the storm. The storm was forecast. You ignored it. There was screaming in the background. Someone was crying. How bad is it? She asked. Bad enough that if anyone freezes to death, the HOA will be held responsible. Silence. Then she whispered, Oh my God! Rescue teams from 2 counties were mobilized. Snowcats, tracked vehicles, and emergency snowplows fought their way up the pass in near-zero visibility. I listened to the emergency radio channel as voices cut in and out through static. We found 3 vehicles stuck nose to nose. We have a minivan buried up to the windows. 1 adult hypothermic, conscious but fading. Each transmission hit like a punch to the chest. The HOA had gambled with human lives, and they were losing. At 5:12 p.m., the first survivors were brought down. A snowcat rolled past my house, its headlights glowing through the blizzard. Inside, I saw faces pressed against frosted windows, pale, scared, shaking. Some were crying. Some were staring blankly. One little girl clutched a stuffed animal so tightly her knuckles were white. They should have never been there. Local news vans started arriving by 6. Reporters stood in knee-deep snow, shouting into microphones about dozens trapped on private mountain road after HOA failed to close pass despite warnings. That's when Karen's phone really started ringing. I know because she called me. They're saying we were warned, she said breathlessly. Did you send emails? Yes. I sent everything. You sent it to the whole board? Yes. And I have receipts. There was a soft choking sound. You need to delete them, she whispered. I laughed. You're not just morally responsible, I said. You're legally responsible. She hung up. By 7 p.m., the full scope of the disaster was clear. Over 40 vehicles, more than 70 people, multiple medical emergencies. Some had run out of gas trying to keep warm. Others were suffering from frostbite. One man had a broken leg after slipping into a ditch when he tried to walk for help. And all of them had driven into that storm because the HOA told them the road was open and safe. At 8:30 p.m., the county emergency manager made a public statement. This was a preventable incident, he said. The pass should have been closed hours before conditions deteriorated. The HOA didn't issue a statement. They were too busy calling lawyers. At 10 p.m., I got a knock on my door. A sheriff's deputy stood outside, snow clinging to his coat. "Are you the one who warned the HOA?" he asked. "Yes. Can you provide copies of those warnings?" I nodded. "I already have them printed." When I handed him the emails, texts, and weather advisories, he flipped through them slowly. "These timestamps," he muttered. "They ignored every single one." He looked up at me. "This changes things." "How?" "Now it's not an accident," he said. "It's negligence." Outside, another rescue vehicle roared past. Somewhere up in that mountain, people were still being pulled from snowdrift, and the HOA was about to learn what it costs to ignore a warning in a whiteout. By morning, the storm had moved on. The mountain was silent again, buried under a smooth, blinding blanket of snow that hid the chaos beneath it. But down in the valley, the damage was impossible to ignore. Ambulances lined the road outside the resort. Exhausted rescue workers leaned against their vehicles, faces red from cold and strain. Tourists huddled in blankets, some still shaking, some staring into space like they hadn't fully returned from whatever nightmare they'd just survived. Local news trucks crowded the entrance, and at the center of it all was the HOA. They tried to move fast. Too fast. At 9 a.m., the HOA released a public statement. Due to an unexpected and extreme weather event, several vehicles became stranded on Whiteout Pass. The HOA is cooperating fully with emergency services. Unexpected. Extreme. No mention of the warnings. No mention of the emails. No mention of the decision to keep the road open for money. Just a storm to blame. Karen called me less than 10 minutes later. "They're asking who sent the alerts," she said. "The board needs to know." "You already know. We just need to clarify." "No," I cut her off. "You need to tell the truth." There was a pause. "We're being advised not to admit liability," she said quietly. "So now you're lying too." "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "If the HOA is held responsible, it could bankrupt us. People will lose their homes." "People almost lost their lives," I replied. She hung up. By noon, the sheriff's department had formally opened an investigation. They weren't just looking at the storm anymore. They were looking at decisions. And those decisions had a paper trail. The deputy who'd taken my documents the night before came back with 2 detectives. They sat at my kitchen table, flipping through my printed emails and weather alert. "These were sent to the HOA board hours before the storm," one said. "Yes." "And they acknowledged receipt." "They did." "Did anyone from the HOA ever tell you they were closing the pass?" "No. They explicitly told me they were keeping it open." The other detective rubbed his jaw. "That's a problem. For them." At the HOA office, panic was spreading. Homeowners were flooding the lobby demanding answers. Some had family members trapped overnight. Others were furious about what the news was saying. "Why didn't you close the road? Why were tourists allowed up there? Who made this call?" The board tried to stay united, but cracks were already forming. Someone leaked the emails. I know because by 3 p.m., screenshots of my warnings were all over social media. Zero visibility expected. Whiteout conditions within 6 hours. Immediate closure recommended. And underneath them, HOA, we're monitoring it. The comments exploded. People weren't mad at the weather. They were mad at the people who ignored it. The local news ran the story that night. Sources confirm the HOA received multiple warnings hours before the storm but chose to keep the mountain pass open. Legal experts say this could expose the association to massive liability. Karen tried to call me again. This time I didn't answer. Because something else was happening. Lawyers were circling. By evening, 3 separate legal firms had reached out to me asking if I'd be willing to provide sworn testimony. Families who had been trapped were organizing. One woman's husband was in the hospital with severe hypothermia. Another driver had crashed into a snowbank so hard he fractured his spine. And every single one of them had been on that road because the HOA said it was safe. The board held an emergency meeting that night. I know because one of the board members texted me. They're blaming each other. Karen says it was Roger's call. Roger says it was a group decision. Classic. When responsibility shows up, everyone suddenly wants to disappear. But the emails didn't disappear. The texts didn't disappear. The timestamps didn't disappear. Someone had made the call to keep that gate open. And now that call was being replayed in courtrooms, on TV, and in front of every angry homeowner in the community. By midnight, the HOA president resigned. Not because it was the right thing to do, but because he knew what was coming. The storm was over, but the real damage was just beginning. The HOA's phones didn't stop ringing for 3 straight days. Every ring was another attorney. Every email was another demand letter. Every knock on the office door was another furious homeowner or traumatized tourist. By Monday morning, Whiteout Pass was no longer a weather story. It was a legal disaster. The first lawsuit was filed by a family from Oregon whose SUV had been buried for 10 hours with their 2 children inside. Their youngest had suffered hypothermia. The complaint was brutal and precise. It cited every single warning I had sent the HOA and every minute they chose to ignore it. By noon, 3 more lawsuits followed. Then 6. Then 12. The HOA's insurance carrier sent a representative. He sat in the boardroom with a face so pale it looked like he'd seen a ghost. "You failed to mitigate a known hazard," he said. "That voids portions of your coverage." Karen nearly collapsed. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means you're paying out of pocket." The room went silent. The HOA had money, but not that kind of money. Not for medical bills. Not for wrongful death risk. Not for dozens of vehicles destroyed and families traumatized. The board members began arguing. "This was your call. You said it was safe. You didn't want to lose bookings." They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. The county held a press conference that afternoon. The emergency manager stood in front of a map of the pass, pointing to where vehicles had been buried. "These closures are not optional," he said. "They are life-saving measures. Ignoring them is reckless." A reporter asked, "Did the HOA receive warnings before the storm?" He paused. "Yes. Multiple." That single word hit like a bomb. "Yes. Not maybe. Not we're investigating. Yes." The HOA's phones started ringing again, this time with angry homeowners. People who had trusted the board to keep them safe were now seeing the truth on the news. You could hear shouting through the office walls. "My parents were up there. My renters almost froze. You risked lives for profit." By Tuesday, the HOA president's replacement resigned. Then the treasurer. Then 2 more board members. They didn't want their names attached to what was coming. Karen stayed, because she knew running now would make it worse. She finally came to see me in person. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "They're saying we could lose everything," she whispered. "The HOA could be dissolved. Homes could be foreclosed. This will destroy the community." I didn't feel sorry for her. "This didn't start with the storm," I said. "It started when you ignored the warnings. But we didn't know it would be this bad." "Yes, you did," I replied. "You just hoped it wouldn't be." The first settlement offer came in that night. 7 figures. Not to me, to the families who had been trapped. And it was just the beginning. The county prosecutor announced they were reviewing the case for criminal negligence. When lives are put at risk by willful disregard, it stops being a civil issue. That word, criminal, made everyone freeze. The HOA had gone from being a nuisance to being a potential crime scene. By Wednesday, the HOA's lawyer called me. "We'd like to know exactly what evidence you have," he said carefully. "All of it," I replied. "Emails, text, time-stamped warnings, recorded calls." A long pause. "We recommend you preserve everything." "Oh, I am." That night, news helicopters flew over the pass, shining spotlights on the buried vehicles still being recovered. Wrecked SUVs and sedans were lifted out of the snow like artifacts from a disaster zone. The public was horrified, not by the storm, but by the people who had let it happen. Karen tried to spin it. She gave an interview blaming rapidly changing conditions and communication breakdowns. But then the reporter showed my emails on screen. The exact timestamp, the exact warnings, and her face fell apart in real time. Because lies don't survive receipt. By the end of the week, the HOA was drowning. Their accounts were frozen by court order. Their legal fund was gone. And homeowners were filing motions to remove the entire board. All because one decision had been made: to keep a gate open in a whiteout. And now the people who made that call were about to learn what it costs to ignore a warning. 2 weeks after the storm, Whiteout Pass was still littered with twisted metal and half-buried vehicles. Recovery crews had turned the mountain into a slow-moving excavation site. Every day, another car was pulled from the snow, doors crushed, windshields spiderwebbed, luggage frozen solid inside. Each one became another exhibit in the growing case against the HOA. But the real damage wasn't on the mountain anymore. It was in court. The first major hearing was held on a gray Thursday morning. The courthouse was packed. Reporters, families, lawyers, and angry homeowners filled every bench. The HOA board sat together, pale and silent, like students waiting to be called to the principal's office. Karen wouldn't look at anyone. The judge didn't waste time. "We are not here to discuss the weather," he said. "We are here to discuss decisions." One by one, attorneys for the trapped families presented their evidence. Dashcam footage of cars sliding into snowbank. Photos of children wrapped in emergency blanket. Medical reports documenting hypothermia, broken bones, panic attacks. Then they showed my emails, large and bright on the courtroom screens. Whiteout expected. Zero visibility. Immediate closure recommended. State advisory attached. Road must be closed within 6 hours. Timestamped. Acknowledged. Ignored. The HOA's lawyer tried to argue that the storm intensified faster than expected. The judge stopped him cold. "Your own records show you were warned repeatedly," he said. "Why was the gate not closed?" Silence. Karen finally stood. "We didn't want to create unnecessary panic," she said weakly. "You didn't want to lose revenue," the judge replied. That was it. The ruling came down that afternoon. The HOA was found liable for gross negligence. Not a mistake. Not bad luck. Negligence. The damages were staggering. Medical bills. Vehicle replacements. Emotional distress. Punitive damages. The total climbed past 8 figures before the courtroom even finished gasping. The HOA's insurance refused to cover most of it. They had violated safety protocols. They had ignored documented warnings. They were on their own. Within days, the HOA filed for financial restructuring. Within weeks, they sold asset. The lodge. The parking facilities. The shuttle service. Homeowners were assessed huge fees, and they knew exactly why. People stopped paying. The community turned on the board. At the next HOA meeting, residents packed the hall. "You gambled with lives. You ignored warnings. You almost killed people." Karen tried to speak. They booed her off the stage. By the end of the night, the entire board was voted out. A state-appointed administrator took over the HOA to manage the fallout. Whiteout Pass was permanently removed from HOA control. The county installed automated gates, weather sensors, and mandatory closures tied directly to state alert. No more profit decisions. No more human ego. Just safety. A month later, I stood at the base of the pass with the county emergency manager. "You probably saved a lot of lives by speaking up," he said. "I wish they'd listened," I replied. "So do I." Karen never went to jail. But she lost everything else. Her home. Her reputation. Her position. Last I heard, she moved away quietly. No farewell. No apology. Just another person who thought ignoring a warning was easier than facing the truth. The news cycle eventually moved on. But in our town, Whiteout Pass became something else. A reminder. A reminder that nature doesn't negotiate. That money doesn't beat weather. That ignoring a warning can cost more than anyone ever imagines. And every winter now, when the clouds start dropping low over the mountains, those gates slam shut. Because one time, an HOA didn't listen, and the snow showed them exactly what that cost.